Time now for Home Truths and the return of that old sea dog, John Peel.
Hello again. I return to Home Truths, refreshed and with the suggestion of a twinkle in my eye. Holidays are good for you, aren't they? Sheila and I haven't had one for 7 years, and I only agreed to go on the Radio Times QE2 cruise because I knew that once I'd agreed, I couldn't back out. Sheila really needs a holiday, several of her friends had said to me. What about me, I replied, but no one was listening. So there we were on the QE2 in the unlikely company of Alan Hansen, Barry Norman and Delia Smith, their wives and husband, and 100 or so Radio Times readers. We all got on famously, I'm slightly astonished to be able to report, and Delia was gratifyingly generous about Ipswich Town, thereby completely disarming any possible criticism from Sheila. We attended each other's little talks. Actually, I don't remember seeing the Hansons at mine, come to think of it, and the question and answer sessions on the stage of the Queen's Room as well. I was asked whether I was still on the Archers and about my involvement with ABBA. Both rather difficult questions to answer, seeing that I've had no involvement with ABBA whatsoever, and my contribution to the Archers started and ended with my singing Yellow Submarine in the back of a van with Eddie Grundy and Mrs. We also had 3 days in New York, and I could go on about that for hours. What a great place it is. And the July the 4th fireworks in Manhattan were beyond even my gifts for exaggeration. New York may be mentioned again on Home Truths, let me warn you. But, in the meantime, what madness has descended on the Home Truths office in my absence? I came in this week to find the team, worryingly perky and zestful at my departure, rocking to and fro at their desks, hugging themselves in a fervent sort of way, dribbling unattractively, and babbling incoherently about beans and half-beans. Yes, Jeff Mead?
How many beans make 5? Well, certainly not the lies and half-truths peddled by your correspondents to date. Another example of BBC lovies getting into bed with the new beans. As an old bean, I must protest. Less of this fashionable spin and false propaganda.
Isn't false propaganda tautological, Jeff? And there are mountains, and I barely exaggerate, of correspondence about how many beans make 5. I leave them for 2 weeks, thanks Roger McGough, by the way, and the production team is in crisis. Condition red for the BBC nurses, unmarked vans encircling Broadcasting House, and taciturn men with steely eyes deployed to try and bring members of the team down by firing tranquilizer darts into their haunches. In short, chaos and insurrection. McGough slopes off to Barnes and his clever friends, leaving me to sort out the beans. The first question I was asked when I walked in wasn't, did you have a good time, but tell us, how many beans make 5? In the name of mercy, tell us. Actually, they did say, tell us, master, but generally speaking, I discourage that sort of thing. There are beans sown throughout this programme, though, and generously sown at that. And what else? Well, there's the 13-year-old who persuaded his dad to buy him a present.
Number 2 son here persuaded me that really what was missing from our lives was a piece of aircraft.
And you must admit I was right.
Possibly.
And there's the podiatrist, not it seems the chiropodist from Newbury, who, and I barely exaggerate yet again, is kinder to blame for the Newbury bypass and by extension to the whole road and runway protest movement, with which, I have to say, I have a lot of sympathy. We have too much tarmac and not enough trees, birds, field mice and voles as it is, and if the price to be paid for their survival is a couple of extra minutes added to the drive to the shops, it hardly registers at all on the scale of human suffering. What else? Well, there's Marion, who has cerebral palsy but is impressively mobile in a powered wheelchair, who fled the old person's home she'd been dumped in Malta when she was only in her late 50s, and started a new life and found love, L-U-V, in Newcastle.
Paul proposed to me 2 minutes after the millennium. He did it on his organiser, and because my eyesight is so bad, I couldn't read it. So I had to ask him, what did you put? And he said, will you marry me? And I said, yes, I will.
So, with all of that to fit into the programme, I'd better press on. But what's all this about?
I felt quite ill when I heard the family on your programme last week discussing which shade of blue Tuesday is, when it is actually Naples yellow.
Or this.
What was that woman on about saying that Friday was blue? Friday is yellow, Thursday is blue, Wednesday's aqua, Tuesday's pink, and Monday's green.
Is this some Blairite initiative or what? I go away for a fortnight and the days of the week are transformed into colours whilst my back is turned. Or am I in some sort of parallel universe? Actually, I rather like the idea of parallel universes and the possibility that there might be one in which everything is the same as it is here, except that John Peel is 2 stone lighter and the new jacket he bought to make him look like James Bond doesn't make him look like a tramp in a stolen coat instead. Why wasn't I at least met at the door with her? Have a seat, John. Beer or 2 coffees. Look, John, there have been some changes around here since you went away. Instead, the team, once alert, even in subdued lighting, attractive, now slack-jawed and scowling, respond to my questions by snarling, Synesthesia. What, the trio that released an LP on RCA Victor in 1969, I gasped. No, that was Synesthesia, they snapped. This is Synesthesia. They see things in colours, all sorts of things. You're blue and pinky red with a hint of red-orange fading into dark grey. How many beans make 5? Go on, tell us. I could see I was going to get no help from them, so I listened to the scores of phone messages you'd left on 08700101234, and coming to it from the quarter deck of the QE2, you've no idea how disturbing all of this sounds.
John Peel. Now, John is usually a dark green, bottle green. Peel is orange, but John and Peel together are sandy-coloured.
Dark grey and then sandy-coloured. Great. A symphony in drabness. Thanks a lot. Can it get worse? It can. Francesca Bondi emailed this to home.truths@bbc.co.uk.
A good friend of mine, Sarah Smith, has this weird thing where she links names with food. It's fascinating, a real party turn, but I think she's embarrassed by this amazing ability. Her descriptions are very, very specific, and she'll always go back to the same one years later. There's one person she knows who, to her, is a purple love heart, another rum and raisin ice cream, and one unfortunate friend is phlegm. She just sees foods where she sees names. John, you're a cold sausage roll, and Peel, a sucked fruit gum.
A sausage roll? A cold sausage roll at that, and a wine gum pre-used and with one careful owner. So I emerge from these proceedings as a cold, dark grey sausage roll, do I? These are people who would have to drop acid to experience normality. I was thinking that things couldn't really get any more Alice in Wonderland when I read Susan Henderson's email. Last Saturday's Home Truths interview with the Eccles family made her realise that she was, well, odd too. Fear not, Susan. Madness is all around us as life gets more like the Book of Revelations than Alice in Wonderland. Perhaps some sort of unholy fusion, the Whore of Babylon in Wonderland, possibly. Susan doesn't see things as colours, be thankful for small mercies, but she does see all numbers as part of a huge and complex map in her mind. She's married to a mathematician, James, and, until last Saturday, he didn't know anything about his wife's numerical contour lines and trig points. The pair came into our studio from Pinner in Middlesex. Grid reference, no, I don't know what it is, and believe me when I tell you that I don't want to know either. And Susan began by describing exactly what her mental map looks like. In fact, she drew it for me.
Well, it's a wiggly line, and then it goes round towards the left and up a bit to 10, and then the teens come along, back to right, and then 20s come, but it's sort of three-dimensional. The 20s come downwards and out. You're looking at me really as if I am crazy.
I'm glad there's a table. No, carry on,
And then it goes the 30s, then the square numbers seem to stick out a bit, so you come up to 49 in a peak. But it happens with dates as well. And it's the same kind of a pattern, like, so I was looking at the 19th century.
Yes.
Waterloo comes up where I have my teens, you know, so 1815, and then down again, 1832, is and then 1900s, and then there's sort of another bump for 20s, just like my bump for teens and 20s.
I mean, at what stage did this...
Well, I thought it's always existed. I thought that's how numbers were, really. I hadn't even heard of synesthesia until last week. Can't even say it. I just listened to the programme last week and heard about these people who could see words as colours, and I was trying to understand that, and I thought, oh, well, it's just like numbers, isn't it? And I was telling my husband about the programme in bed that night, and I said, oh, it's just like numbers. These people see words as colours. And he says, what on earth are you talking about? And I says, well, you know how numbers start off over there and wiggle around and go up over there. And he couldn't understand what on earth I was going on about.
How long have you been married, as a matter of fact?
Well, it's 15 years tomorrow.
Oh, and this had never come up before?
Not as such, no.
Well, it's not the sort of thing you talk about, really.
It certainly isn't. No, I don't think...
I spoke to my brothers. I have 3 brothers, and 2 of them think I'm completely crazy.
Yeah.
But the youngest brother said, oh, yes, I know all about this.
Does it bother you, James, that Susan never discussed this with you before?
I don't suppose it bothers me, but I suppose I was slightly taken aback by it, because, I mean, she knows I've got a maths degree, and I'm a chartered mathematician, and I'm slightly puzzled that she maybe didn't discuss what I would call the topology of her, of her number line, shall we say. Because I've studied sort of mathematics for a while, and things like, you know, mathematicians like Cantor tended to have the number line as a straight line, basically, called the continuum, whereas Susan's drawing of hair numbering seems to be somewhat peculiar.
What's this thing here that looks like a cartoonist drawing of a nose?
This is the 16th century, that's sort of Henry VIII bit, and these are 1500s, that's James III. And then a year is a sort of a circle, starting in January over on the left-hand side.
Well, every year or just this year?
Oh, every year.
The idea of, identifying particular points in the line with numbers has certainly happened in the past, but I think the geometric arrangement of it is somewhat strange.
Yes, I mean, now that
it's not a very good picture, that squiggly line.
It's not a very good picture,
I'm not very good at drawing.
but on the other hand, I mean, it gives a clearer picture than the one I had before, which wasn't, there wasn't a picture there at all.
Right.
So, I mean, anything is clarification. If I picked a number out of the air, 37, what does that do to you?
I see the numbers round about it. I don't see where 1 is or where 100 is, but I would see 37 and maybe 33 to 40. So it's located in relation to those numbers.
It's like a relational sort of thing.
Do you see 37 sort of highlighted in any way, and the other numbers around it in the kind of mystery?
Oh yes, it's darker. The others are less important because you've told me to think of 37.
Yeah. I'm reaching around under the desk trying to find the button to alert security. I know there's one here somewhere.
I'm sure it helps to do sums and relate to things.
I mean, do you know of anybody else who does this apart from your brother?
No, but I haven't started speaking to many people about it because it didn't seem to be something particularly interesting.
Yeah.
I thought everybody did it. I can't understand.
Maybe normal to you.
I can't understand how people can add up if they can't see where numbers are in relation to each other.
Do you think you find it charmingly eccentric or rather worrying? Has it brought you closer together, or do you see it?
Well, good question.
I'll give you a moment to think about it, if you like.
Thank you. Well, I think it's interesting because, you see, numbers as a concept are quite strange things, really, because for centuries people have tried to work out what a number is. And
well, is that one of those, like, what is art arguments?
Exactly, yes, really. Mathematicians have tried to go to what they call the foundations of mathematics, to try to work out what is a number. Things like fractals and the Mandelbrot figure and things like that, have come into sort of like popular culture through, posters and things like that, computers and posters. And so I think the concept of numbers and, in a way, number lines are perhaps, can be. I mean, if you look at the Mandelbrot...
This all sounds like it sounds as though you're avoiding the issue here. Has this brought the two of you closer together, or are you thinking to yourself, my wife is a really spooky person?
I think the latter.
Okay. An extra topical conversation.
As I say, she's always been good at sums, but I never quite knew why.
James and Susan, thanks very much for coming in. Security said you were no trouble at all afterwards. I'm beginning to believe that I may be the sanest man on the planet. Monday isn't a rainbow. I don't see Sheila as a takeaway when I get home. No silly shapes leap into my mind when I think about the date. July the 22nd? That's shaped a little like a three-point plug, isn't it? Get off. That's another common attribute of those calling themselves, a trifle smugly, I think, synesthetes, as Laura Harrington did when she emailed us this week. Laura, any more of this, and I'll make your August pear-shaped. Any further thoughts on this issue, please visit the programme website on www.bbc.co.uk/Radio 4/Home Truths. Now the story of a woman who, at 58, found herself dumped in an old people's home abroad. An ugly situation to be in, and one that Marion Norman at times feared she'd never escape from. Marion has cerebral palsy, and she's been in a wheelchair for the past 10 years. She found herself alone in Malta after her second husband, who'd been a violent alcoholic, died. With nobody to look after her, Marion's mother, according to Marion, refused to step in and help and insisted that Marion be cared for in a home. For an independent woman, a teacher, and a campaigner for people with disabilities, this was too much. Marion told Felicity Finch just how bad it was.
I was late 50s, and late 50s is too early to go into any home. I was perfectly independent. As you see, I live an independent life now. So for me, it was purgatory.
What effect did being in the home have on you?
I was so traumatized, Felicity. I didn't know what was going on. I cried because I knew that once I was in there, the door was closed and I didn't know how I was going to get out. I felt suicidal. being in the home was like being shot into a prison. I felt I was in prison.
How long were you there for?
15 months.
So, did you have to leave the home in secret without
Yes.
anybody knowing?
Yes. I left the home leaving my suitcases, my books. I only could carry one small suitcase, and it was like jumping into a swimming pool. I didn't know where I was going to plunge. I didn't know Newcastle. I didn't know anyone here. But I thought it couldn't be any worse than Malta, and it was worth the try. And the nicest sound was when I got off the plane to hear the porter say, "Hello, love. Where have you been? You look very brown." And I thought, oh, I'm home. Thank God. You can't imagine, Felicity, what it was like to escape out of Malta.
How did you first meet Paul?
I met Paul at the Theatre Royal, but I was starving hungry. So I went up to the restaurant upstairs to have a sandwich, and he was sitting there in a wheelchair, and he had a beard, and I thought, oh, he might be a writer. So we were sort of talking to each other across tables. Oh, and then 2 days later he phoned me up and said, would I like to come to a show called Stand By Your Man, which wasn't really the most conducive beginning of a friendship, because the story was about Tammy Annette and her alcoholic husband, and I ended up with tears streaming down my face. Poor Paul didn't know what to do with me. All thought that he'd upset me, and I had to explain to him that I'd been through the whole situation, and every time the boyfriend of Tammy Annette said, I'll try, I won't do it anymore, I kept saying, I've heard that one before.
She was in tears. You hear about the Geordies being tough guys, and it was hard because I didn't know what to do. I was just like a typical man. I didn't know what to do, to hold her hand or put my arm around her or anything.
And after that, I met him in Eldon Square when I was out with my carer quite often, and he sort of seemed to arrive from nowhere. And I thought,
What was it about Marion that attracted you to her?
At first I was just started as friends, and then every time I was away from her, I just ended up missing her. So then we went to a jazz night at, say, Chris Barber at Whitley Bay. And I just realised I was falling in love with us.
We have entirely different personalities. Perhaps I'm a bit more pushy than he is, but Paul is shy, and I'm not. And both being in a wheelchair, we know each other's problems. He is to me my eyes and my ears. Without him, I can't see or hear. He could hear the doorbell, I can't. But our disabilities work well because we cook together. We do nearly everything together, and we're perfectly happy.
If we're going out shopping, I got to tell Marion where to go, and I grab a hold of the back of a power chair. We just go round Newcastle, or have a ride on the metro and go somewhere.
When did you decide to get married?
Paul proposed to me 2 minutes after the millennium. He did it on his organiser, which I bought for him for Christmas. Said he wouldn't, would you marry me? And because my eyesight is so bad, I couldn't read it. So I had to ask him, what did you put? And he said, would you marry me? And I said, yes, I will.
Were you surprised?
Absolutely gobsmacked. Those are the flowers down there. This is my bouquet.
They look
and
beautiful.
The bridesmaids' flowers. The bridesmaids have got cornflowers and white bouquets. And the same flowers in my hat. Paul likes blue and white, so that's why I chose it.
We're here this afternoon to witness a joining in matrimony of Paul Norman and Marion Shirley Walden. If any person present...
It's very unusual for two disabled people to fall in love. If you're not living in an independent situation as I am, if you're in any kind of residence, they think it's somehow funny or peculiar that two people should kiss or show affection towards one another. I don't understand why we should be different. It makes life a bit more complicated, but it's a perfectly normal reaction for anyone to fall in love.
To witness that I, Paul Norman,
To witness I, Paul Norman,
do take Marion Shirley Walden
take Marion Shirley Walden
to be my lawful wedded wife.
to be my lawful wedded wife.
Once again, I'd like to take the ring and place it onto your groom's finger. You are now husband and wife.
We made it. Oh.
How do you both feel?
Mom,
Fantastic. Just happiest days of my life, really.
disability can marry. We can be happy. That's most important.
I agree with that, Marion. If any disabled person could get married, it doesn't stop anybody. Society sort of thinks, disabled people don't get married, and we proved it, and we want to prove it on Home Truths.
And the very best of luck to you both, Marion and Paul. Marion, as Tammy Wynette would have sung under similar circumstances, sit by your man. And thanks to Felicity Finch, too. Our children have already made it perfectly clear to Sheila and me that at the first sign of physical or mental enfeeblement, we're off to the wee shed in the heather retirement home. Time to reread The Wooden Horse, I suspect. Home Truths recently had an email from a nurse, and a very moving email it turned out to be, too. Claire Atterbury told us how she'd spent years working with cancer patients and supporting them and their families through their illnesses. Sometimes, inevitably, that meant dealing with patients who were dying and with their relatives. But what she wrote to us about was how shocked she was when the professional nurse part of her had to deal with a very personal loss. Claire was very, very close to her Auntie Trish, and Auntie Trish got cancer. The pair were in constant touch, and it was on one of their regular phone calls that Trish passed on her melancholy news.
She phoned me up just one evening. I was sitting watching the television, and she just said, "Bear, what's chemotherapy?" And my heart sank, because you already kind of know why. But I just asked why, and she said, "Oh, well, I had some today." I was absolutely stunned, because she hadn't told us about a lump or bump or anything, really.
Whereabouts was your aunt at the time?
She lived in a place called Paraiso, which is near Marbella.
And you went out to Spain to look after her?
Well, immediately I went out to see the doctor within about 2 weeks, to try and find out, because she didn't really want to know much about it.
So that's fairly common, isn't it?
Yes, I think so. And I managed to find out from the doctor what was happening. The doctor was very, very good indeed, and explained that they didn't know where the cancer had come from. And my heart sank further, because that often has a terrible prognosis.
How difficult was it for you then, I wonder? I mean, having been used to working with cancer patients, with the fact that it was a close member of your family that was the patient?
It was awful. I felt a very, very long way away. Trish and I were very, very close. She was my mother's only sibling, and she'd never married and she didn't have children. We were her whole family, really. And I sort of phoned her a lot. She didn't really want to talk about it with my mother, so we talked about quite a lot just between ourselves.
Were you able to let her know? Did she indeed want to know what to expect and how things were going?
Not at all. She said providing that myself and her close friend Lucy, who lived out in Spain as well, knew what was happening and we were happy, that was okay.
So you went out at some stage to stay with her until the end, presumably?
Her friends phoned me to say, "Can you come?" The hospital where I work were very kind and said, "If you need to go, just go." So I went in February, and my mother and my brother came with me. And I looked after her first in hospital, because she was admitted the day we went, and I discharged her, in fact, because it was 40 miles from where she was living, and took her home and looked after her myself.
So what were the practical things that you had to do to look after her?
We had to go and buy a bedpan for a start. That was the first thing we did when we got her home. We had to buy oxygen in because she was finding breathing difficult.
You had to administer pain relief, presumably?
Yes, I was giving her morphine at first orally, which wasn't too bad. Although it was really strange not having someone to talk about it with and to check it, because we have to check with 2 people in this country. And then it went on to injections. That was much harder. And there was a terrible dilemma between giving her enough to make sure she was pain-free and actually giving her so much that it could end her life.
Goodness me, yes. It must have been a difficult time emotionally. And presumably you were also having to try and find a sort of variant on the truth, somewhere between the two, between your aunt's attitude and your own knowledge, to convey to your mother.
Yes, I was much more open with Trish. I actually said to her, I need to talk to you about some things. And I encouraged her to talk to my mother, and she did, and they managed to sort out silly things like bank accounts and what she wanted for her funeral, and they were able to talk quite clearly about what she wanted.
So how did you cope with all of these responsibilities, Claire?
I kept a diary, strangely, something I've often suggested to my patients that they do. I needed to tell someone, and I didn't really feel up to telling my mother. She had enough to deal with. And I was doing 2 roles. I was doing niece and nurse. And you don't need nurses, maybe, to fall about and fall apart.
No, certainly not.
So I was trying to say, yes, this is fine, everything's fine, we're going exactly down the pathway we should be. But every now and again I was quavering.
It got too much, and
Yes.
you kind of poured it all out into your diary, I take it.
Yes.
So what was the most difficult part of it all for you?
Just before she died was very, very hard indeed, and actually my mother coped better with that than I did. Her breathing was quite noisy, and I couldn't bear to listen to her. And I was being woken up every few hours to give her morphine injections through the night, and so I could barely bear to go into the room when she was like that, because she was very sleepy. But she was awake enough to know we were there, and although she wasn't speaking, she was definitely keen that someone was with her. And my mother just sat and talked at her, really, and held her hand.
Yes, I mean, my own father died of cancer, and I have to admit I've always felt guilty since his death that I didn't go and see him and spend more time with him in these last few weeks, because I just simply couldn't bear to. And I mean, presumably there must have been an element of that in your thinking.
Oh yes, oh definitely. It was quite frightening, actually. I felt very responsible, and in fact, for a long time after I came home, I didn't think I'd done my best. But with a little bit of a gap, I now think maybe I tried my hardest.
That's right. But it's difficult to know what best would have been in this context, really, because it's something for which you can have there aren't any guidelines, are there, really, being niece and nurse, as you say?
No, not at all.
Do you feel that having now experienced, as it were, cancer from the reluctant consumer's side, that your attitude to the work that you do has changed?
Oh, definitely. Particularly when we were in hospital, because I had to stay with her and look after her. Again, the system's very different. Although I speak no Spanish, I very quickly learnt the word for pain, and now, and help.
Yes.
So every time you called the nurse, I didn't realise what an age it seems before they answer the bell, even when it's only a very little while. And then the wait between having asked for painkillers and going on to them finally arriving with the injection was incredible. It felt like hours, and she was in absolute agony. It was awful.
And I mean, do you find now that when patients call for pain relief that you move as quickly as you can to bring it to them?
It's much, much more important. I mean, it always was important, I hasten to add, but you look at things slightly differently, and I didn't realise also how conflicting one's feelings are in that situation, and you're totally confused about what you want, and what you want is for your relative to be comfortable, but you don't want them to die, and you want them to be around and healthy forever, and however unrealistic that feels.
Doesn't go away.
It doesn't go away ever.
As I said, I've felt so bad over the years about not spending more time with my parents and others when they were ill. You'll have done them a kindness by staying away. Trust me on this. Dr. Akhenaten, Swindon. That I've been trying to introduce our children to the idea of my own mortality. Largely in the hope they'll be nice to me and get me another glass of wine from the kitchen, of course. Thanks for talking to us, Claire. You're listening to Home Truths on Radio 4 with me, John Peel, swordsman, dandy, and the rightful Margrave of the Marshes. Now, Tim Parks is normally such a mild-mannered man, living in sun-drenched Italy with extra virgin olive oil provided by the social services and a Maserati in every driveway. Tim periodically sends us thoughtful reports on the universe and its Byzantine emotional autostrade and byways. His columns are always saturated with references to food, places, and a way of life that sounds so enviable that I would gnash my teeth if I dared. But I shouldn't really feel like that, should I? Probably my colourful accounts of taking the car to the Union Street garage in Stowmarket for its MOT, or not being able to turn left, the direction in which we live, at the end of the High Street, unless I'm driving a bus, stirs similar envy in our listeners overseas. What do you think? Don't answer that question. But this week, the week's burnt sienna with a faint burgundy stripe, by the way, Tim is all fired up over music and song.
You're standing at the waterfront at Cernobbio, waiting for the steamer to take you across Lake Como. The rigidly laid-out gardens with their porphyry fans and right-angled borders have a sniff of Switzerland about them, too neat for Italy. The air's cold and bright. The lake has a steely autumn melancholy about its polished darkness. Then you're just thinking about Pliny and Trajan and how the ancients always thought of lakes as the entry to the underworld, when a PA bursts into life. Apparently music is necessary, and a voice begins to sing, "Non posso non ricordarmi di te." It's a hoarse male voice paying a tortured tribute to the great god love. "I can't not remember you," with the aid of an indifferent PA system. "Non posso pensare che l'amore non c'è." A strained voice. "I can't believe you don't love me," suffering the throes of lost love, apparently. The tourists gather, they chatter and laugh. A couple of adolescents are singing along. Across the clear air, the voice strains to strain in an entirely fake approximation of raw emotion. You're on the beach at Pescara, playing with your 8-year-old daughter, where the tame Adriatic laps clean sand in a shimmer of summer heat. She stands in the shallows, lifting the water in cupped hands to let it dribble down her bright skin. And you just started to tell her the story of Medea, a girl who made that very same gesture because she'd fallen in love with Poseidon, when all at once, instead of the god galloping up from the sea to carry off his bride, the PA system crackles into, as they say, life. It's the beach bar's PA. And a voice begins to sing, "Non c'è il profumo di te." It's a hoarse female voice singing about lost love. Not here your smell this year. A voice straining to strain, you are immediately aware. A voice complacently aware of being false, that its hoarseness is false, its emotion is false. A voice flaunting its falseness, you tell yourself, suddenly feeling extremely angry, and all the more so because your daughter is mouthing along. Every time you're out and about in Italy, you tell yourself, every single time you're in a beautiful place, you are always interrupted by a hoarse voice, male or female, straining to regret, a cracked voice trotting out its tortured and irretrievably trite tribute to lost love, rejoicing in its kitsch. Steffi loves it, my wife remarks. How is it, the poet Leopardi asked, how is it that the warmest and most vivacious of national characters, the Mediterranean Italian, is also the coldest and most cynical? Far from being warm, these songs are cold and cynical, I reflect, and stupid. The worst side of the national character surfaces in these endlessly repeated cadences, these hoarse and irretrievably false love songs that you simply cannot escape in Italy. Or perhaps it's not just Italy. You're in Reading General's casualty ward. Your son's ear infection seems to have turned into something more dangerous. They're rushing him off to put him on a drip. You're anxiously pacing the waiting room, when suddenly a TV clicks on, and Rod Stewart is singing Maggie. Maggie, I wish I'd never seen your face, in a voice that strains to strain beyond all straining. This is surely inappropriate, I tell myself. No, this is obscenely inappropriate. In a place where people are bringing their loved ones in pain and sickness, where people are wringing their hands in anxiety. At least, I tell myself, at least Elton John didn't sing English Rose, however unforgivable the words, in a hoarse voice. Rod, I wish I'd never heard your voice. Bad music flows from an inexhaustible source, I tell myself. but fortunately my son is out of danger. The inexhaustible hypocrisy of the human spirit, seeking to falsify every experience of beauty and intimacy and love. I hate hoarse voices singing about lost love.
Tim Parks. I know exactly what he means, although, oddly enough, I used to love Rod Stewart when, and just after, he was in the Faces. I think Rod's success encouraged loads of other singers to sing with that pseudo-emotional hoarseness to which Tim alludes. As Rod would, I think, quickly acknowledge, he sang that way because he was heavily influenced by black American soul and gospel singers, and they, in addition to often having gorgeous voices, I'd love to play you Stanley Winston's No More Ghettos in America here, could write what I suppose you might call genuine folk poetry. For example, and you can probably come up with a better example than this, I was always very moved by the lines, "Feel so bad, just like a ball game on a rainy day," from Chuck Willis's Feel So Bad. I'm not even 100% certain what that means, but it sounds sort of perfect. I bet you felt as bad as a ball game on a rainy day at some time in your life, perhaps when someone told you your name conjured up a vision of mechanically recovered pig meat and a tomato crushed on a warehouse floor. Nowadays, too many lyrics are written in the studio by musicians in a hurry who fall back too readily on variants on "Hey baby, let's do it one more time tonight," although I think there are good lyrics still being written. But Tim, yes, there is too much greetings card pop and too many voices flaunting their falseness. There's nothing false about the love that Emma feels for Jess Knowles, though. Jess emailed home.truths@bbc.co.uk this week after hearing on this programme, where else could you hear it, frankly, about feline foot fetishists, a subject that triggered off a frankly unwholesome communication from Jane Bishop of Kenley. I'm not prepared to go further with this, other than to reveal that it has to do with cats and earwax. Jane's earwax. Jane, just say no, please? But anyway, back to Jess Knowles and Emma. Jess trotted around her house barefooted for 30 years, until Emma arrived.
Emma is an African grey parrot who's besotted with me. More exactly, she's besotted with my feet, and the sight of my bare toes sends her off into feathered ecstasy. But part of the devotional process for Emma involves regurgitating whatever she's recently eaten, and then stuffing it between my toes. This only had to happen once or twice to end 30 years of wanton shoelessness.
It is hard to imagine a better reason for putting your shoes back on again, Jess. Does anyone else have experience of having parrot vomit packed between their toes? I thought not. I always hope that we'll be able to elevate the level of these programmes eventually to bring you hour-long reflections on 13th century Flemish poetry, if there was Flemish poetry in the 13th century, of course. But instead of Flemish, we get phlegm, and it hurts. Right now, not phlegm, but sniffing. Some time ago, we had a wistful email from a man who loved the smell of old transistor radios, dust on the valves and so on. Fantastic. Well, last week, Frank Lund from Hampshire wrote to us going all misty-eyed and dreamy about the smell of the cockpit of a Canberra aircraft. Hard to imagine, to be honest. So we phoned Frank and said in our cynical Radio 4 media darling sort of way, "How do you know what a Canberra cockpit smells like, geezer?" And he confounded us by answering that he knew because he'd got one in his garden. Ah, we lied. We thought that must be the case. Can we come and see it? And thus it was that another Frank Wilson, travelled down to Hampshire to investigate. It's true. It's there. It's 17 foot long. It's a WT-536 Mark PR-3 photo reconnaissance plane built in 1949, and the Lund family love it. Frank and his son Matthew are both flying men, real boys' own stuff, and probably wish they could have taken a shifty at the marshalling yards in Bremen during their youth. Frank's wife, Joyce, is less enthusiastic, but, as Frank discovered, everyone has a view on the thing in the garden, even the postman.
We're at Twyman's Hill at the moment, Willow Cottage, and there's a plane in the garden. Well, it sort of blends in with the scenery, though, doesn't it, really? It's just part of the garden.
Much of this sort of thing going around here?
Not really, no. Normally just cars.
Hello,
Thanks for coming round.
Frank. Just bumped into the postman, actually, who told me not many of the places around here have got an aircraft in the front garden.
I hope he wasn't too non-complimentary about it.
No, he said it blends in. He's been here as long as he's been doing the rounds.
Yes, I often see people walk by and turn and stop and look and, what the blazes is that doing there? It's not the sort of thing you expect to see in country, you know, caravans, maybe the odd boat, but not the sharp end of an aircraft.
Matthew's leading me into the lounge. It's not too bad in here, is it, Joyce? There's... No. Oh, well, I missed the propeller.
When he takes an instrument apart, he usually does it in the lounge, sitting on the sofa.
Kitchen aircraft free, is it?
Yeah.
Good. No. In most houses this would have been a bedroom, presumably, but it's a workshop in this house.
My son's bedroom. My eldest son's bedroom.
Right.
But when he moved out, my youngest son took over. And so did my husband.
Yes.
He took over. I wanted it for a bedroom for them, really.
Yeah, it looks like you lost out to a lot of aircraft equipment and tools and workbenches, drills. So this isn't much of a bedroom, Matthew, is it?
No.
This is how it all started. Started to collect bits and pieces like this and bring it home. Then he got more bits and more bits and more bits and more bits and more bits. And oh, no, you can't go anymore. No, no more, no more, no more. Stop! He would not stop.
Does it bother you?
It does bother me a bit, yes. I don't know what to do about it.
I just saw on the back of your car here, there's a sticker saying, "I'd rather be flying."
Yes.
Do you fly yourself? You're a
I
pilot?
have done. My number one son achieved his pilot's license, and the number two son here has what? How many?
21 hours. I'm just waiting to finish off my private pilot's license.
Right. So it's in the blood, obviously.
Yeah.
Then.
Oh, yeah.
So you've got a few cars out here.
Yeah.
But this is the main event, isn't
Yeah.
it? Look at this.
I mean,
Get some idea of the size of it. I mean, it's a bit like a decent-sized boat, isn't it? How would you describe it?
well, it's basically it's sort of a 6'6" diameter bullet.
Right. I'm quite large. I'm sort of 6'1", 6'2". Do you reckon I can get in?
Yeah.
Can I sit in the pilot seat?
Yeah.
Yeah, if I can squeeze in.
Hello, Frank. Can you hear me?
I can. Hello?
This is just one of the things that we're working on in the aircraft, the intercom, as well as the navigational equipment.
You sit up here on your own at night sometimes.
Oh, yes. Yeah, you can't resist it to get in all the flying gear, get in the seat, strap yourself in and just think, man, I wish I could have flown these.
Right. How did this originally come about then? How come we're sitting in this fantastic Canberra in your front garden?
I started visiting aero jumble stands, and the number two son here persuaded me that really what was missing from our lives was a piece of aircraft.
And you must admit I was right.
Possibly.
It was interesting actually getting it home because instead of backing it in, we just drove it straight in and it was dark. And when I got up in the morning, looked out of the window, I realised the scale of it in comparison to our house and the drive and flip me.
How much time does it take? How long do you spend looking after this thing?
You may spend a weekend at it and then you might not go in it for a month. I'm interested in getting another one, a bomber version, but it's just raising the money and trying to talk Dad into we should have another one in our lives.
So how does the crew arrangement work out here between father and son? Who's the pilot? Who's the navigator?
Johnny, who gets in here first? You know, I can have my fantasies in the evening. He can have his fantasies during the day.
Is it fantasy?
It's a fantasy based on reality, really. Yeah.
He says he wants another one.
I think it's a matter for very, very careful negotiation indoors.
What are your chances?
I wouldn't like to compromise my situation by taking up a position on that.
Very diplomatic. Do you think they're satisfied with just the one cockpit out in the garden?
Oh, no.
I don't think I'm betraying confidences because, well, they were telling me about their wish for another one. So I was hesitating because I didn't know if you knew that they wanted another one, but you obviously do.
I do.
You've heard them on the phone.
I've heard it. Yes,
Right.
yes.
What are you going to do about that?
If another one moves in here, I'll move out. I've had a scrap man round here to say, would you like me to get rid of that for you? And I looked at him and looked at the cockpit. I thought, I can't really get rid of it, because if I do, I get shot.
But you were tempted though, were you?
Yes.
A little bit.
Little bit.
Yeah.
The Lund family and their Canberra, thanks to them and to Frank Wilson.